Redditors who quit on the spot. What was the exact moment you knew you had to walk out? Working as a server in a notoriously understaffed chain restaurant. I'd been there 10 hours straight, no break, doing the job of two people. A customer started screaming at me because their fries were cold, then threw them at my face. I looked at my manager, expecting some backup. He just sighed, handed me a rag, and told me to clean it up. Princess, it's almost closing. That was the exact moment. I took off my apron, dropped it on the fry-covered floor, and walked out. Never looked back. Junior admin assistant. Overworked, underpaid, constantly doing extra for team spirit. My mom was having major surgery, something I pre-booked time off for months in advance. The day before, my boss called me in his office and said, "Look, we really need you to push back that surgery. We have a huge client presentation you absolutely have to be here for." I looked him dead in the eye, said no. I quit, and walked right out. He just sat there dumbfounded. I worked retail at a place where the customer is always right was basically a religion. This lady was returning a clearly used, ripped shirt, claiming it was like that when she bought it. I politely refused the return. She then called me a racist slur loud enough for half the store to hear. My manager came over, heard what she said, and told me to just process the return. We don't need a scene. That was it. I took off my name tag, dropped it on the counter, and walked out. Never felt so free. Work in a warehouse where safety was an afterthought. Forklift brakes were constantly faulty. Shelves were unstable, but hitting targets was all that mattered. One day, a newbie nearly crushed himself when his faulty forklift barely stopped short of a collapsing stack. Management just shrugged it off, saying accidents happen. I looked at that poor kid, realized I was next, and thought, nope. I tossed my keys on the supervisor's desk and said, "Find someone else to die for your quarterly report." Left right then. CNA in a nursing home. Heartbreaking work, but I love my residents. We were always short-staffed, running on fumes. Then management announced they were cutting 2 more CNAs from my shift to optimize resources. That meant 3 of us for 30 residents, many with high needs. I pictured the impossible workload, the missed care, the neglect. I looked at my schedule, then at my supervisor, and simply said, "I can't do this ethically anymore." Handed him my badge and walked out. I couldn't be part of that. Construction grunt. Foreman was a real jerk, always cutting corners. We were setting steel beams for a new building. I was harnessed up, obviously because we were high up. Foreman yells at me to take off my harness just for this one quick bowl because it was slowing me down. So it would take 30 seconds. I looked down, then at him, and just said, "You want it done without a harness, you do it yourself." Dropped my tools and walked off the site. Found a new job the next day. Junior developer at a hip startup. Long hours, ramen noodles. We're a family, vibes. Stock options were always dangled as the big payoff. I overheard the CEO, completely plastered at a company party, telling some investors how hilarious it was that us kids actually believed those options would ever be worth anything. He was laughing, calling us naive idealists. The exact moment. I finished my drink, walked to my desk, grabbed my backpack, and left. Didn't even send an email. Ghosted. Working drive-through a notoriously busy fast food joint. The manager was a volatile guy, constantly screaming. We were slammed. A customer complained about their order, and without even checking, the manager grabbed a full tray of fresh burgers, still raw, and threw them at me across the prep area. It was greasy, disgusting. Burgers splattered everywhere. I just stood there, covered in raw beef. I looked at him, picked up my apron, threw it back at his face, and said, "I'm out." Walked out the door. I volunteered at an animal shelter that eventually hired me. It was hard, heartbreaking work, but I love those animals. We were underfunded and understaffed, constantly struggling. The breaking point wasn't the hours or the low pay, but when a manager told me to just let the cat starve for a day, it'll eat then, referring to a terrified, non-eating rescue who needed careful coaxing. The cat had been through enough. I took off my apron, told her she could starve herself, and walked out. 6 months into tech support for a notoriously buggy ISP. We were constantly yelled at, but the one that broke me was a woman who'd been without internet for a week. She screamed that I personally owed her the internet, then demanded I send her free pizza and a movie rental code as compensation for her inconvenience. My manager, listening in, pinged me to de-escalate the customer, offer anything reasonable. I typed into the chat, "My anything reasonable is finding a new job," hung up, and clocked out for good. I was a docent at a small, regional museum for years, passionate about local history. Our new director, fresh out of business school, decided we needed to be more interactive. He unveiled a new exhibit featuring actual, centuries-old farm tools, without glass, and encouraged children to play with them. My protests were met with, "It's about engagement, not preservation, Martha." Watching a toddler bang a 200-year-old iron plowshare against the floor was the last straw. I gave him my badge and keys right there. Working at a small-town library was my dream job, until the new head librarian started implementing community standards for book selection. It began with removing controversial children's books, then moved to questionable adult fiction. The exact moment was when she ordered me to relabel the LGBTQ+ section as adult special interest and move it to a back corner, out of plain sight. I looked at her, looked at the books, and said, "I can't do that." She said, "Then I guess you can't work here." My reply was, "Exactly," and I walked out. Graveyard shift security for an abandoned industrial complex. My only backup was a broken radio. One night, I reported suspicious activity, lights moving in one of the far buildings. Management told me, "Just go check it out. Don't call the police. We don't want to alert anyone." My boss, from his warm bed, expected me to confront potential intruders alone in a pitch-black, unsafe building. I texted back, "Not getting paid enough to die for rusty pipes." Drove my truck to the office, dropped my keys, and left. Freelancing for this boutique agency, which meant endless revisions for peanuts. My client, a social media influencer, had me design a logo. After 8 rounds, she finally approved it. 2 days later, she calls screaming because my aunt's boyfriend's daughter, who does TikTok, says the font is so basic. She demanded I change it again for free. My project manager agreed to it. That was it. I told them both the logo was perfect as is. They could pay my full rate or find someone else. I hung up and blocked their number. Tutoring a notoriously spoiled high schooler from a wealthy family. He barely tried, and his parents constantly undermined me. The final straw came during a session where he'd spent 45 minutes scrolling TikTok. I gently tried to get him back on task. His mother burst in, yelling that I was stressing him out and that his happiness is more important than your arbitrary deadlines. She then told me to give him an A for effort regardless. I packed my bag, calmly told her I couldn't ethically participate in that, and walked out of their mansion. Working as a kitchen porter in a Michelin-starred restaurant sounds fancy, but it's just glorified dishwashing under extreme pressure. Chef was a screaming terror. One night, during the busiest service, I accidentally dropped a tray of clean glasses. They shattered everywhere. Chef immediately grabbed a searing hot pan from the stove and slammed it down inches from my hand, roaring, "Are you useless?" The heat seared my arm, not touching me, but terrifyingly close. I looked at the broken glass, looked at the pan, looked at him, and just walked out the back door. Selling shoes wasn't my passion, but it paid the bills. My manager was a slick salesman, all about pushing numbers. One afternoon, a visibly uncomfortable customer was trying on shoes that were clearly too small. She kept saying they hurt. My manager came over, eyed her up and down, and then said, "Oh, but they make your feet look so delicate." The customer looked horrified. I looked at him, then at her. I couldn't. I just put the box down, grabbed my jacket, and walked out, muttering I'm done. I genuinely loved making coffee at our local indie cafe. The smell, the art, the regulars. It was great, despite the owner's stinginess. One sweltering morning, the main milk fridge had clearly died overnight. The milk was warm, starting to separate. The owner came in, saw it, sniffed it, and then said, "It's fine, just use it." I stared at him. A customer ordered a latte. I poured, smelled the sourness, and dumped it. "I'm not serving spoiled milk," I said, took off my apron, and walked right out. Working as a pet groomer assistant was my dream. I adored animals. The head groomer, though, was another story, impatient, rough, always yelling. One afternoon, she was grooming a tiny, trembling terrier. The dog was clearly terrified. She got frustrated, grabbed the dog's leg to force a position, and the poor thing yelped. A sharp, undeniable cry of pain. That was it. I gently took the dog, looked her dead in the eye, and simply said, "No," grabbed my things and walked. Best decision ever. Fresh out of college, I landed an entry-level marketing assistant role. Eager to impress, but also ethical. My boss, a senior VP, kept pushing me to enhance product claims, slowly veering into dishonesty. I tried to word things carefully. Then he gave me a draft press release, full of fabricated scientific findings, telling me to make it sound legitimate, but don't change the facts. I looked at the blatant lies, looked at his smirking face. "I can't write this," I said, stood up and left. I loved being a summer camp counselor. The kids were great, the outdoors refreshing. But the director was dangerously negligent. Terrible staff-to-kid ratios, ignored safety. One scorching day, a child with severe bee allergies suffered a reaction. Their parents had provided very clear instructions, but the director had lost them and then blamed the terrified child for not being careful enough. Watching that little kid struggle, hearing the director's callousness, I snapped. I walked over, said, "I'm out," and left the camp right then. Valet parking was decent, got to drive some cool cars, and tips were usually good. But our manager had a habit of inventing manager fees for late arrivals, skimming off the top. One night, a sweet, older couple, clearly on an anniversary, were short $2 on this made-up fee. He refused to get their car, humiliating them. I watched, my blood boiling. Pulled out a 10-spot, slapped it on the counter, and told him, "You're pathetic." I quit. Got their car, for them myself, still their anniversary. Data entry in medical billing was tedious, but reliable, good benefits. My supervisor, however, was a constant source of passive-aggressive pressure, complaining about her speed. One stressful afternoon, my grandmother called in a panic. She'd fallen. I immediately asked my supervisor if I could leave for an hour. Her response, "Are you sure it's important enough? We have a lot of claims pending." That was the precise moment. My family comes before any job. I stood, looked her straight in the eye. "Yes, it is. Permanently important," and I walked out. Washing dishes at the busiest diner in town was brutal work, but there was a certain rhythm to it. The owner was a notorious cheapskate. One Friday rush, the exhaust fan over the deep fryer died. The kitchen instantly filled with thick, greasy smoke. It became nearly unbreathable, everyone coughing and choking. The owner refused to close, instead handing out flimsy paper masks. I looked around, inhaling toxic air, at the masks doing absolutely nothing. Took off my apron, tossed it into the sudsy sink, and walked out the back door for good. I worked at a small electronics repair shop, mostly chill, until the owner started getting shady. One day, a customer brought back a faulty tablet still under warranty. My boss took the tablet, then handed me the refund form and whispered, "Just lose this. He's been difficult, and honestly, the tablet's fine. We'll resell it." I stared at the form, then at him. My integrity isn't worth saving him a few bucks. I put the form back on the counter, grabbed my backpack, and said, "I'm out." Was doing roofing on a 3-story building, already not thrilled with heights. My boss pulls me aside, tells me to unclip my safety harness because we're running behind. He then shows me he's tied the main safety line, not to an anchor, but to a stack of loose bricks at the edge. "Just be careful, champ," he grinned, pointing me up. I looked at that pathetic knot, then at the concrete ground below. My life felt more valuable than his deadline. I just took off my hard hat, dropped it, and walked right off site. Grill cook at a bustling burger place. Friday night, chaotic. This dude comes up to the pass, absolutely livid. His burger had pickles. Before I could even open my mouth, he launched his entire, full milkshake right in my face. It hit me squarely, dripping down my hair, into my apron, coating the grill. My manager, seeing me frozen and dripping, just sighed and said, "Can you please clean that up? We have a line." That was it. I removed my greasy hat, dropped it, and walked out the front door, past the waiting customers. Junior copywriter busted my butt on this huge client pitch. I practically lived in the office. During the presentation, my boss took full credit, didn't even glance my way. Then, a client asked a specific question about my key slide. My boss fumbled, looked at me in front of everyone, and snapped, "Why don't you tell them, intern? Since you did, whatever it is you did." Intern. I was a full-time copywriter. I stood up, walked straight out of that meeting room, cleared my desk, and left the building without a word. Working at a supposedly fancy bistro. We were already short-staffed, and then the host called out. My manager, instead of covering, told me, "You're hosting, waiting 12 tables and bussing. Just hustle." The dining room filled, orders backed up, people were furious. I was running, spilling, completely overwhelmed. Then, juggling a tray, I slipped, sending a cascade of water glasses onto a table of loud complaints. My manager yelled, "What was that?" I just stared at the mess, took off my apron, and walked out the back door into the alley. I genuinely loved working with animals at this big pet grooming chain. One afternoon, I saw a senior groomer brutally yank a tiny terrier off the table by its scruff, snarling, "Behave, you little demon, or you're getting a bad haircut." The poor dog yelped, terrified. My heart sank. I walked over, gently took the trembling dog from her, and told its owner there was an emergency. Then I marched straight to the manager, explained what I'd seen, grabbed my things, and quit on the spot. Couldn't be part of that.